Okay. Hi, everyone who's watching us on Facebook. Thank you so much for tuning into our third Facebook Live chat. I'm Jessica Deppis, the volunteer coordinator at the Capital Area Immigrants' Rights Coalition, and I am really excited this week to be talking to a number of representatives from our Detained Adult Program. The Detained Adult Program, otherwise known as DAP, is our oldest program in CAIR Coalition, and it's really the bedrock of CAIR Coalition's work in so many ways. So I particularly wanted to talk with DAP attorneys and legal assistants about, just kind of getting more in depth about how DAP works, because a lot of our volunteers and other supporters, their first interaction or understanding of CAIR Coalition comes through the Detained Adult Program. So if you have volunteered with us on a jail visit, or you've come into our office to staff the hotline, there's a really good chance that that was, or a 100% chance that that was through our Detained Adult Program. So I want everyone who supports our work to understand a little bit more of, how that volunteering plays into the bigger picture of CAIR Coalition. And if you haven't volunteered with us before, I hope that however you support our work, this will give you a better understanding of what that support means. So if you haven't watched our previous Facebook Live chats, I'd suggest that you go back and look. Last week, we talked with Catherine Conway from our bond program, which was super interesting. And the week before that, we talked with some other partner organizations about how to support immigrants and our immigrant community in the DMV during COVID-19. So with all that said, all that introduction, I'm going to introduce the staff members who have thankfully taken the time out of their busy schedules to talk about the Detained Adult Program today. We have Catherine Story, who started working at CAIR Coalition in June of 2018. Catherine is responsible for facilitating our jail visits to 3 detention centers in Maryland and providing pro se assistance to individuals without attorneys. I hope that everyone understands what all that means by the end of our Facebook Live chat. Elizabeth Schmelzel is a staff attorney representing detained clients in immigration court, and before joining CAIR Coalition, she practiced immigration law at Ayuda, another legal services nonprofit in DC that actually we talked to their volunteer coordinator and outreach manager a couple of weeks ago in one of these other chats. So shout out to Laura for doing that with us. Rebecca is a staff attorney representing detained clients in immigration court as well. She joined CAIR Coalition in 2019 and is a recent law school graduate. And finally, Anna Dion Lanier is a staff attorney working mostly in the Virginia detention centers with our legal orientation program. And she also represents a few of our detained clients in immigration court. So I'll introduce each of them as they come onto the screen so that you know who everyone is. But we're going to start off with talking about our legal orientation program. Catherine, who's our Maryland-focused senior legal assistant, is going to talk a little bit about what the legal orientation program actually is, and maybe give a sense of how it fits into the bigger puzzle of the Detained Adult Program. So Catherine, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, so the Legal Orientation Program, like Jessica said, is one of our main programs under the Detained Adult Program umbrella. The Legal Orientation Program started in the early 2000s as a way to assist individuals that are in immigration detention in representing themselves and gaining the tools and resources to navigate the process, because as we all know, it is incredibly complicated. So the Legal Orientation Program is operational across the United States. I believe there's about a dozen service providers similar to CAIR that work in over 40 detention centers and provide really similar services to what we're doing. The bulk of the Legal Orientation Program consists of visiting detention centers. Here at CAIR, we visit 5 facilities, 3 in Maryland and 2 in Virginia, and we're working with about 1,200 to 1,400 folks at any given point in time. So a lot of people that we're seeing on a daily and weekly, monthly basis. So the visits that we take to the detention centers happen on a weekly and sometimes a monthly basis, where we are going into the facilities and providing group orientations, which consist of information about rights in immigration court, common defenses to deportation, as well as other useful information about how individuals can navigate this process on their own. On those visits, we are accompanied by several staff members and also some of our wonderful volunteers that dedicate lots of hours to joining us to make sure that those visits go off without a hitch. In addition to those group orientations that we're conducting with folks, we do a lot of individualized workshops as well that go more in depth on specific topics that are more relevant to small groups of folks. So for example, we do a lot of bond workshops. That's a very popular topic. Last summer, we did a lot of workshops specifically on asylum and how to apply for asylum, since there were a huge influx of folks coming through the border. And then in addition to that, we conduct what we call our intakes, which is assessing for relief eligibility for folks that are in detention. We conduct those intakes with folks that are unrepresented, and later on, this is kind of how we, meet folks on the visits, and those folks either end up being represented through other CAIR Coalition programs, whether it's the Universal Rep programs or the LOP program assists them in some other way, shape, or form, if possible. So that's kind of the gist of the program. We're kind of on a cycle that we visit the facilities every month, but that's kind of all the info.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. And I know that during this chat, we're going to inevitably end up using a lot of acronyms. So LOP is the Legal Orientation Program. Universal Rep is our Universal Representation Program, which we are going to talk about a little bit later with Elizabeth and Rebecca. I think that it's really important that our supporters understand what the Legal Orientation Program is, because like Catherine mentioned, those intakes end up serving as referrals to many of our direct representation programs. And the detention center visits that we go on are really essential to all of the rest of our work. So if you volunteer on a jail visit with us, you're going along with our Legal Orientation Program. Okay, so with that said, I just wanted to ask Catherine one more question, which, I know that legal assistants are doing so much on a daily and weekly basis, and I think it might be interesting for everyone to just understand kind of the process of preparing for a jail visit, kind of what goes into the preparation and, taking everything apart afterwards. So maybe if you could, I know that not every week is the same, but talk a little bit about like what a week in the life of a LOP legal assistant is like.
Yeah, totally. So especially right now, things aren't operating as normal, but say we were back a month ago and back in February. So to give you an idea of what a typical week will look like, on the Maryland side of things, we have visits occur almost weekly. Sometimes we're visiting 2 to 3 facilities a week. And so there's a lot that goes into preparing for those visits. We have a lot of internal deadlines for our own staff. And those deadlines help us to ensure that we're getting all the information that we need in order to conduct the visit in a timely manner. That way we can help coordinate with the facilities to make sure that we are giving them the information they need to help us make sure the visit runs smoothly. So there's a lot of communication and coordination on a lot of levels that's going on, both internally and externally. And it all kind of comes together, at the visit, where things more often than not run incredibly well. But to give you a little bit more in depth of an idea of what that looks like. So on our jail visits, we're not only meeting with people that are new, that have never talked to CAIR Coalition before, but we're also meeting with folks that we've conducted an intake with in the last month, 2 months, and we're providing them with follow-up information about what we think could be helpful for them in terms of navigating this process, whether it's providing them with a guide or an application, things like that. And so we have to make sure that we have every bit and piece of information into our database by a certain time, so that we're able to pull those reports, print out all that paper, and take it to the facilities. Unfortunately, we say that the facilities are kind of black holes. We can't bring any technology. So a lot of what we do is the administrative burden of printing out a lot of documents to make sure that we have everything that we need. So that's kind of the bulk of a lot of the work that I do on the front end. Like I said, with 2 to 3 visits happening a week, I'm kind of in this cycle of preparing and then what we call breaking down from a visit, which is taking all the information that we get from folks during the visit and entering that into our database. So entering our intakes into Salesforce, which is our database, and making sure that we are, submitting requests for translations, which our volunteers help out with, and all of that type of stuff to make sure that we are able to follow up on certain requests and prepare for the next visit, which could happen the following week.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Catherine. And, I think it's really important for people to see some of the administrative work that goes into preparing for detention center visits, and that really allows the entire rest of our detained adult program cycle to work. I don't think it's as visible or always as glamorous as the rest of our work, like representing people. But I think it's really important to see and to understand just like a tiny sliver of how it happens on a weekly basis. If you've attended a jail visit training, you've heard me say that the booklets of information from all of the people we're going to meet with are essentially our version of a laptop, and we need legal assistants and other staff to help us prepare those laptops every single time that we go on a visit. So thank you, Catherine, first for all of your hard work and also for explaining it to all of us. So I also have Anna Dion-Lanier here, who works on the legal orientation program, but Anna works on the Virginia side and is a staff attorney. So I was hoping to hear a little bit from Anna, both about kind of what it means to be a staff attorney in LOP, and then also how that work has been affected by COVID-19. I don't want the whole thing, it's easy to turn every chat we have during COVID-19 into how we were affected by COVID-19. I want us to really just understand this process in general, but I know that LOP has been doing a lot of work to kind of adapt to the changing conditions in detention centers. So I'll leave it to you, Anna.
Great, yeah, hi. So I think that as a staff attorney, we do a lot of similar things that Catherine was explaining. We're also there trying to support some of these administrative tasks. LOP is a real team, so there's no hierarchy. Just because I'm a staff attorney doesn't mean I'm also not helping with breakdown, helping printing, helping with deliveries. It's really a massive team effort. I think a lot more of what staff attorneys do is leading a lot of the, within the jail visit at least, leading a lot of the screening of individuals, the GOs. Again, this is legal assistant work as well, but we help also do a little bit more of answering some more complicated questions sometimes while we're there to see how we can help people understand their situation as best as possible. LOP is legal orientation, so it's just about giving people information and it's really a teaching job. And so it's helping people, like Catherine said, understand the immigration laws in this country and trying to understand how they can best represent themselves in court, because that is the reality of the situation. Majority of people that we talk to are not going to get an attorney, and so we do follow-up work as well, which helping people get more specialized information. We have a lot of pro se packets to help people understand that and then answer follow-up questions, and really trying to help people, kind of empower people to help them be able to represent themselves in court and be comfortable, or at least understand that they have rights in this system and that they can speak up for themselves. They can speak in front of a judge. They can advocate for themselves. On the follow-up side, we're also doing, I think we also do, like Catherine said, the screening part of it also helps us try to place people when we can. We have a lot of internal pipelines that go different places, but then we also do have a pro bono pipeline and have a lot of great pro bono partners that in the area that help us place some cases, especially some harder cases, which is excellent. I think, so that's my job. Again, not a daily regular thing. We're doing a lot of answering phone calls on a regular basis, trying to figure out people's situation. It's a lot of triaging, I would say. I think, so I guess moving on to how things have changed, just a little bit about how COVID has kind of changed the situation. It just obviously has changed a lot about how we do the work that we do. A lot of the times we are just on the phone a lot because our jail visits are, at least in Virginia, they're monthly, so we don't really see people in person on a regular basis, so we do a lot of phone calls. But now that we don't have that regular visit, it means that we've been coordinating a lot, even more so with the facilities in order to do virtual jail visits. That's a lot of different kinds of communication and a lot of sort of trying to help people trying to help people via the phone, which isn't as ideal. Unfortunately, too, people are still getting detained. There are still new people in the facilities since we've been unable to go. And the main LOP goal is to be able to talk to everybody in detention. And right now that's been more difficult than not, but we're still moving along. We're still, you know, currently trying to get to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Anna, and especially for talking a little bit about how LOP has been conducting these remote jail visits, which is just a whole new undertaking. I think it is important for everyone to understand, right, that many of the people we talk to on these weekly and monthly jail visits do not end up with an attorney. CAIR Coalition would love to be able to place every single person in immigration detention with an attorney, so it is definitely not for a lack of trying, but there simply are too many people in immigration detention in this area for us to be able to place all of them. We do have, like Anna mentioned, a number of different internal pipelines, which are essentially systems for referring people we meet on jail visits to potential attorneys who can represent them. But I hope that this gives a little bit better of an understanding of how we can have different attorneys in different programs within our detained adult program who do different kinds of work. So Anna might occasionally have a client who she's directly representing, but for the most part, she's talking to people who we call follow-ups, who are, you know, maybe getting help or getting a better understanding of how the immigration process works from Anna, but that doesn't mean that she's representing them. So we spend a lot of time making sure that everyone understands that, because we never want somebody to have the impression that they have an attorney or that they're being represented when they're not. But it is complicated, and I know, you know, when I'm doing jail visit trainings and talking to volunteers about this, there are usually a lot of questions about how exactly that works. But hopefully that gives, you know, a little bit more information. Anna, I was hoping you could also talk a little bit about what volunteers do on jail visits, and kind of how volunteers play a role in the legal orientation program, whether or not they know how much of a role they play. That would be great.
Of course. Obviously, honestly, we would not be able to do any of the work that we do without our volunteers. They're the backbone of a lot of LOP work when it comes to, I think the first thing that comes to mind is translation requests. We have a ton of people always, and those translation requests aren't just for direct rep people. We also, as we help people pro se, we also sometimes get people sending things in from family members who want to send something into court. And so that also is contributing to helping this person who does not have an attorney be able to send documents to court. Obviously on jail visits, really volunteers are kind of the backbone of our jail visits. We, like I said, are trying to reach out to every single person in the detention facility, especially all of the new people, in order to be able to give them the best information possible. And we can only do that with the help of our volunteers. So specifically on jail visits, our volunteers are helping deliver, first deliver messages for our, not oldies, but people we've already talked to before. So people who we've already talked to before who might need some follow-up packets of information, we call it just pro se material. And so they can deliver those messages and talk to everybody. And then they also help conduct the intakes that we do, which are like mini interviews, which are, as we talked about before, are the way that we are able to refer some people to some of these pipelines. And really, they're oftentimes the first one-on-one interaction that people in detention get with CAIR Coalition. And I know that they're all so, I've just heard a lot of times that people are so grateful to finally get a chance to be heard. We are the only organization that goes into the facility really for the detainees. And so that's always exciting to hear. And finally, I think the other largest group, and like especially now the most active and just most helpful group, has been the hotline volunteers. Hotline right now is our only form of communication with throughout all of DAP, throughout all of the detained adult program for us on LLP side, but also for the direct rep. And they have just really stepped up to the plate in helping us figure out the more virtual, not in the office hotline volunteer stations. Normally when we are in the office, they have their little stations out front, and we get to see them. But now they've really been just amazing in helping us out that way. And we love our volunteers.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you. And I think it's nice for volunteers to hear it from someone other than me that they are really helpful and essential in this process. For those of you who are watching who might not know what all of our volunteer opportunities are, Anna just gave a great overview. We have translation volunteers who help translate documents in a number of languages. Spanish is the most common, but we need people who speak literally any language imaginable. We've had maybe half a dozen different languages worth of translation requests just in the last few weeks. In addition, we have hotline volunteers, and usually those volunteers are in our office taking calls from people in immigration detention who want to get in touch with our staff or with their own private attorneys. And since we don't actually have an office we're working in right now, thank you, COVID-19, all of our hotline volunteers are currently taking calls from their homes, which has just been a really interesting process, but we're really grateful to them for sticking with it. And then finally, our jail visit volunteers, which Anna just discussed, are the ones who go along with us on these full day visits and help conduct intakes and deliver messages to the people we're talking to. So the last thing I just wanted to note about what Anna was saying is when you hear our staff say something like pro se, a pro se detainee is somebody who is representing themselves in court. So they don't have an immigration attorney, but we might be helping them as they represent themselves. So I know that for many people who hear about this for the first time, they're like, how is that even possible? How could you possibly represent themselves? But many people do it, and many people do it successfully. So yeah, I just want to make sure that everyone understands kind of the phrases we're using as we go along. Before we switch over to talking about our universal representation side and our kind of direct representation side, I was hoping that Catherine could jump in one more time and just talk a little bit about how these referrals that we've been talking about work from LOP's perspective. So I know that Catherine works a lot on the Maryland side of kind of getting people who are in those initial stages of conversation with us matched with a direct representation attorney. So Catherine, if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Totally. So like we said, like our jail visits are our first point of contact with a lot of folks. And on those visits, we identify folks who might be residents of certain counties or have other qualifying factors that would make them eligible for one of our universal representation programs. In Maryland, there are 2 programs operational in Prince George's County and then Baltimore City, where folks that are residents of those cities or counties could be eligible for an attorney. As of right now, it's kind of a lottery system, so not everyone is eligible, but in terms of the requirements, they just have to be a resident. There is, for at least one of the programs, there is an income requirement, but most folks that we're working with are, well under that, level of income that would otherwise, be seen as that they could afford a private attorney. And so when we are conducting these intakes on the visits, we are flagging folks that we think, right then and there could potentially be entered into one of these pipelines, like we call them, which is kind of our referral system. But later on, after we've entered all of our information into our database and we review the intakes, we're able to kind of further assess whether that person would be eligible or not. Unfortunately, sometimes we get the wrong zip code from someone, or, they, were living there maybe a month ago, but later on moved or whatever the case might be. And so from there, LOP, Legal Orientation Program, will send folks that we think might be eligible for the program to the Universal Representation Programs for them to kind of vet a little bit further whether or not, one, they are eligible, and two, if they'll be selected. Unfortunately, not everyone is selected. So some of those folks kind of bounce back into what the LOP realm. And from there, we are kind of able to assess what type of assistance we'd be able to provide, whether it's, translations or, just providing them with more information or whatever that might be. We at CAIR, work with anyone regardless of, their criminal history or their immigration history. And I think we are really proud of that. And so we're not just taking cases that appear to be an easy win or, that are super sympathetic. We're taking any case, at any time with any fact pattern, and we really fight for any client, pro se or represented, that come, through our jail visit, whether they get repped through us or not. And I think that's really, really important to understand that, we're not cherry picking the cases that we take. They kind of just fall in our laps. And from there, our attorneys, take it from there and do what they can and, work their magic in a lot of ways. And it really is quite inspiring. So yeah, that's kind of how it works.
Awesome. And I'm really glad you mentioned that, Catherine, because I get that question a lot too, kind of how we decide who we're going to be helping or who we're representing. And I hope that having Catherine and Anna talk a little bit about how the legal orientation program works, you can see that really we do talk to everyone who wants to talk to us has the chance to. And even with everything going on right now, I've seen firsthand how hard LOP is working to make sure that everyone in detention knows about the work that CAIR Coalition is doing and knows what options are available to them and what information is available, even while we can't be visiting in person. So that's been really amazing to see. I hope that this is a good transition to move over into talking about our Universal Representation Program a little bit more. So Elizabeth Schmeltzel and Rebecca Spira are here from our Fairfax and DC UREP programs, and I'm really excited to hear more from them about basically what universal representation is, but also what it means to be a direct rep attorney with CAIR Coalition. So if we could start off, Elizabeth and Becca, if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about where these UREP cases come from when they're not coming from our LOP pipeline, and then also maybe just what the UREP process looks like for the two of you.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Rebecca. I am a universal rep, direct rep attorney at CAIR Coalition, and I am a direct representation attorney for Fairfax County specifically. And just to give a little bit of backdrop of what universal representation, direct representation is, what that means, and why it's important. As you probably know by now, CAIR Coalition represents everybody in detention in Maryland and Virginia. Or does not represent, but everybody who we are representing is detained. And large majority of those people are in removal proceedings, also known as deportation proceedings. So they'll eventually see an immigration judge in an immigration court. And the immigration court is in some ways a lot like criminal court that you see on TV. There is a judge, there is a prosecutor, that's the Department of Homeland Security prosecutor, but it's also a lot different in the sense that immigration court is a civil proceeding. So unlike criminal court, where people who can't afford an attorney are provided an attorney to help them fight their case, somebody in immigration proceedings, they can pay for their own attorney if they want to, but if they can't afford it, they're not going to have one. So what universal representation is essentially a public defender system for immigration proceedings. And while that's not at this point constitutionally required, like it is in criminal proceedings, certain jurisdictions, certain localities have recognized how important it is and how much better the chances of somebody winning their case are when they have an attorney. So they have helped their community members who are in removal proceedings who cannot afford an attorney by supporting programs like the Universal Representation programs at CAIR Coalition. So that's kind of like a broad overview for kind of why that's important and what makes CAIR Coalition's Universal Representation program so special. The counties that do have universal representation programs are Fairfax County, Northern Virginia, DC, then Baltimore County in Maryland, and Baltimore City in Maryland, and Prince George's County. So essentially, that's what our job is as staff attorneys, is to represent somebody throughout their removal proceedings if they are a member of Fairfax County for me, and for Elizabeth for DC, and Fairfax actually. So just to answer your question more directly, Jessica, how we get our cases, really by and large, it is through LOP. The jail visits are like the principal way that we get our cases. We cannot offer somebody representation if we do not know who they are. And like Catherine's story, like Anna was saying, CAIR Coalition talks with everybody who is detained in Maryland and Virginia if they are looking for representation. And so when our legal orientation program does their jail visits, when they go there and talk to people, they will ask people, you know, where were you living before you were detained? When they come back from their jail visits, or, you know, when they're breaking down their jail visits now in the COVID era, they will flag for us who was a member of Fairfax County, who was a resident of DC, and we'll reach out to those people and assess whether or not they could potentially afford an attorney on their own. And if they can't, we'll offer them representation and represent them throughout their removal proceeding. Sometimes that's just a bond case. Sometimes it's a trial in 2 weeks that we're working around the clock for. And, you know, I think this was mentioned before, having an attorney doesn't always mean you're gonna win, but it does mean that you're going to have somebody who's going to fight for you and help you with your case and help you put forward the best defense possible. And that's why it's so important, because like in criminal, I mean, really actually different from criminal proceedings, the consequences in immigration and in deportation are potentially going back to a country where you fear you might be killed, or it's exile from the people that you love and the only home you've ever known. So the stakes are really, really high, and ensuring that there are programs that allow for attorneys to represent community members is just so important for that reason.
Thank you, Becca, for sharing that. And you're completely right. You know, we can't ever guarantee that somebody is going to win their case, but having an attorney who's representing you just makes such a difference. And I think all of us who work at CAIR Coalition has really seen that firsthand. Since we're talking about universal representation in a little bit more detail, Elizabeth, it would be great if you could talk about what the process for getting universal representation in your district looks like, since you work in DC, and we have these DC budget hearings and budget forums every year. So if you could talk a little bit more about that in detail, that would be great.
Right, so the reason universal representation exists at CAIR Coalition is because the localities that Becca mentioned got together as a community, and they decided our immigrant brothers and sisters matter. And they lose more often when they don't have attorneys. And maybe we as community members can do something to make sure that they're more likely to have an attorney. And so the counties and the cities that Becca mentioned just advocated from the grassroots level on up. And Their gathering together, their organizing is why, for example, my job exists. Even now, though, that these programs exist, we often have to keep fighting so that they continue. And one really great way to do that in Washington, D.C. Is through the mayor's budget meetings. And these, we just had a cycle of these very recently, where people who care about immigration issues, either because they work at CAIR Coalition or they volunteer at CAIR Coalition, or they're a person of faith who feels convicted by this issue, or their brother or sister or cousin is involved in deportation proceedings, can come together and gather and face the mayor and say, we think there should be funding for this kind of legal protection for people in our community who would not be in the situation they're in had they been born where I was born, for example. And so this happened very recently. Loads and loads and loads of us in matching blue t-shirts got together and went to these these DC budget meetings, several over the past few months, and got to stand up and take the mic and say, Madam Mayor, you know, we care about this. And there were immigrants in the crowd. There were DACA recipients in the crowd. There were people saying, my cousin was on the verge of deportation and CAIR Coalition stepped in and saved him. And so when COVID is over and gatherings like that are happening again in your community, we would invite you with open arms to be a part of that process. Because while the end game might be securing someone an attorney, my job does not matter if the community isn't invested. My job doesn't exist, but for volunteers and people who are concerned about anti-immigrant rhetoric in this country, getting together and saying that job, that legal representation job, whether it's the kind of work done in the detention centers or in the courts, makes the lives of immigrants better, and we as a community ought to invest. And I think particularly right now, we're talking about a group of people who are being held in close quarters in a jail-like setting during an international pandemic. And so all of us, regardless of our role at CAIR Coalition, have had to respond to that. And community support makes that a whole lot easier. Everybody knows that COVID is a crisis. It is infinitely more dangerous when you are sleeping in a bed, in a dormitory with 84 beds. Yeah? And we have been responding on every level, both in our, as a direct rep attorney, my individual representation has had to shift because of COVID, but also at a high policy advocacy level with these localities like Washington, D.C. and Fairfax County, communicating to them, as we have, your residents are in unique danger because they are detained. And they are detained because of where they were born. And we want to encourage people to continue this fight, even with this new sort of international issue. It is inextricably linked to immigration. It is not separate from what's happening in our public health community. It is worse for these people. And so now more than ever, if you see events or budget meeting opportunities coming up in the next few months, please participate, because we are all at more risk now, but no one is more at risk than people housed in oversized cages with large amounts of people and not enough cleaning supplies. So we really do need your advocacy.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. Really powerful, and I think it is really great to show people that there's still plenty of work to be done while all of us are stuck at home, and that there's going to be even more work to be done as soon as this stay-home order or quarantine, depending on where you're living, has been lifted. So I've been saying this over the course of these Facebook live chats, but you know, don't let this kind of period of social distancing or isolation make you think that any of these needs have gone away or gotten less significant. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean that these things aren't just as important as ever. So I really appreciate Elizabeth sharing that. To finish this chat, I was hoping that Becca and Elizabeth could talk a little bit about really the best part of their work, which is kind of the stories and the people that they meet, and also the wins that come out of this kind of representation. So Becca and Elizabeth, just to kind of conclude, do you have any positive news or stories that you can share with us and our supporters?
Sure. So I think, what drew me to this work, the reason I went to law school is people. And the interaction I get to have with people really regularly is just such an honor. And, it's a horrible time of life that people are in usually. If they're calling me, it's not because they're happy. It's not because good things are happening in their lives. But to be invited into that and walk alongside them for maybe a couple of weeks, maybe months and months and months on end, where they're calling you 3 times a week and really making you feel like you're one of the most important people in their lives is, there's no greater privilege I've ever had in my life. And I think right now the fight has become especially hard, but we've been crafty. And we are writing letters directly to detention centers, reminding them of the danger that people being detained face because of COVID-19. We are applying for bond. We are litigating tough cases aggressively. I mean, as everyone on this call has said, we believe that everyone is entitled to due process, which means we take really, really hard cases. And there's a couple cases I took recently, I would say in January, that I thought, there's no way we're going to win this. And I would have been right had CAIR Coalition not been involved. But this particular man I'm thinking of, who could not read or write, came here with his little boy, just the 2 of them, struggled the entire time I knew him to fully understand what was going on legally because of the complicated system, and I think he had some cognitive difficulty. I walked into that courtroom still convinced we were not going to win, and within 15 minutes of the hearing started, I realized we got this. This judge is totally on our side. But these are legal arguments we're making that you can't make everywhere. They're unique to the Fourth Circuit, for example. And someone representing themselves is really going to struggle with something like that. It is a bit of a complicated argument. We had to get psychologists involved. We had to have expert testimony. But because this person had the resources of CAIR Coalition behind him, that trial lasted 2 hours. He's out. He's reunited with his little boy, who actually didn't know where his dad was when he was taken into detention for about 5 days, had no idea where his father was. And the wins like that just are all the motivation you need to keep going, even when there's a pandemic and a crisis and people don't understand what's going on, because you've seen the other side. And for their resilience and walking with me in that, I'm so grateful to the clients.
Just to echo what Elizabeth said, it really is a privilege to be able to do this work. I feel like I have the best job in the world, and I am so grateful that places like Fairfax County and DC allow me to do this work, and that they recognize the human rights issue of detaining immigrants, and have made that a priority for the counties. I really think that is being on the right side of history, and that is really paying attention to your community. So just being able to have this job is a privilege, and getting to work with the clients. One particularly challenging but also really beautiful outcome was working with a father and daughter who were detained together, a 19-year-old girl and her father, who were, the only reason they were detained is because they had missed a court date because the father was sick. And there was really nothing that they could do to make that court date. It was outside their control. The father was in the hospital, and they're detained during the COVID pandemic because of this particular gentleman's sickness. He was at higher risk for COVID. because of the sickness, we filed a request for humanitarian release to ICE, which was denied. That was incredibly disappointing, incredibly disheartening. In fact, there are 40 Fairfax County residents who are detained in Virginia jails right now, or in detention centers right now, who have not been released because of, despite COVID-19, even though we filed multiple requests for humanitarian release. The bright side of this was, despite the denial of the request for release, the father and daughter still got out on very low bonds, which was a huge win, and they were able to return to their communities. And I think the even brighter silver lining of this was that CAIR Coalition actually brought a lawsuit against ICE in Virginia and in Maryland to essentially stand up for the rights of immigrants who are detained in unsafe conditions, like Elizabeth said, sleeping head to head in dormitories, without enough cleaning supplies, without masks, gloves, doing everything sort of en masse without the ability to socially distance themselves. Fighting the detention of these people is one of the privileges of working for CAIR Coalition. And even though my client was released, we are still bringing that fight against ICE, because continuing to detain people amongst a global pandemic is not safe, it is not just, and CAIR Coalition is there for the fight. So that is an ongoing challenge, but it's also one of the beautiful parts of this job.
Thank you so much, Becca, and thank you, Elizabeth. I think that's a great strong note to end on. I'm so appreciative to Anna, Catherine, Becca, and Elizabeth for taking the time to talk more about the Detained Adult program today, as well as giving some insight into our response to COVID-19 and kind of how this whole process works. If you all have questions for anyone on this panel today, feel free to comment, and we'll be sure to get back to you with responses. Thank you again to all of our panelists and to everyone who is listening in, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy.